everybody and welcome back to another video. I'm your host, the OT Astartes, and welcome back to another episode of Astarties Analysis. And today we are finishing Hetty Feather Season. And the thumbnail says it all. Things can only get better. Can only get better. Can only get better. If you don't know what that song is, the song, is Things Can Only Get Better by a band called D-Ream. Now, for those who were born in the 90s or lived in the 90s, this was Tony Blair's theme song, for those who know. But a little interesting fact as well is that Professor Brian Cox was part of this band. You know, the one who talks about science all the time and that nearly every female science teacher has a thing for. But anywho, we are talking about episodes 9 and 10. So, last episode, Hetty, a simple mistake that Hetty made by dropping the letter and Matron Bottomly reading it. It was meant to be a love letter to Harriet from Matthias, but Matron Bottomly read it instead, and Hetty went slowly insane throughout the episode, and it set up this story arc. And now she is in the Tench, and Harriet will be sent away. Things can only get better. So let's begin. In the Tench, Hetty is banging on the door and Harriet is escorted off by Matron Bottomly onto a carriage. As it rolls away, Matron looks smug as hell as she is victorious. She has finally defeated Hetty Feather. Oh, how the tables have turned. So it's all back to business for Matron Bottomly as she goes into the boys' classroom, and today there is going to be an art exhibition. The boys are printing the pamphlets that has to meet Matron standards, which, yeah, I get, because standardization is where you produce a product up to a certain standard. So, like for my stop motion Gallifrey Falls, I had to do a lot of editing to it. Even when it was uploaded, you know, I watched it and I noticed that there were several spelling mistakes. So one of the things that I decided to do was to edit out all those spelling mistakes because it cannot fail. This is actually a good job if you're a perfectionist like me. Crownborn says that the boys are precise and asks that the girls are also preparing for the art exhibition. He also asks about Hetty being in the Tench after the chaos of the last episode, and Matron just walks away from it and says that the girls are next on her list. So she immediately dodges the answer to that question and she immediately goes out. Matron brings Sheila, Blanche and Elizabeth into the kitchen and explains that their Matron brings Sheila, Blanche and Elizabeth into the kitchen and explains their roles. Elizabeth will take on the coats and Sheila and Blanche will be serving food. Elizabeth asks to serve instead as she always wants to mingle with the guests, but Matron says no. Ida chips in and says that she needs more experienced chefs, but Matron tells her that she'd better teach them as she walks off. Sheila welcomes her friends to the kitchen duties and remarks anybody who puts Hetty in the Tench has to be on their side. So back to the Tench, Hetty continuously bangs on the door and eventually she decides to give up. Now to Matthias, and he is incredibly pissed off at Hetty because he'll never see Harriet again to tell her that what he was going to say. Gideon says that Hetty is also suffering as well. Ned suggests that they sneak out to find Harriet as Matron will be distracted with all the guests. The guests then arrive, all greeted by Matron Bottomly, and one in particular charms her by kissing her hand. In the kitchen, Ida is giving instructions to the girls. Sheila notices that Ida put in flour instead of sugar and asks Ida whether she's okay or not. Ida tells them to start again, and then she goes off to fetch the jam. We cut to the tent again, where Hetty is still suffering. Back to Cranbourne, and he is giving the boys instructions on how to set up for the exhibition. Walter and Gideon have been asked to set up the easels, which are the painting display thingies. Vince and Judd will place the tags on the paintings, and Matthias and Ned will help guests with the drapes. I like that word, drape. I think that's because of the draping DDT, which is, I think, one of Randy Orton's moves. And Tommaso Ciampa's Willow's Bell. That's a move as well. Matron comes in with said guest, Mr. Dearheart, and he shows Matron a painting of two young girls. Both are dressed in white. One holding a basket and the other with a puppy. He says that the painting will fetch about £200. Matron tells Cranbourne to think of what they could do to the hospital if they had that much money. Cranbourne responds by suggesting that they get new writing slates and new boots. Matron interrupts and walks off. Matthias spots an empty box and he tells Ned that all he has to do is to make himself invisible. Back in the tent, Hetty continues to cry and eventually lays on the floor. What I love about these sequence of scenes with Hetty, even though they are brief, you can tell that she slowly loses hope. Back to the exhibition setup, and Matthias swaps a few of the tags on the paintings for a prank. Vince notices this and he confronts him. Cranbourne then tells them both off and confines Matthias to the dormitories. This gives him the opportunity to go into the crate, but to do that, Ned and Walter cover Matthias with a painting behind everybody's back. Then Lady Asquith and Colonel Brigwell arrive and meet Mr. Dearheart. Brigwell says that he has met Dearheart before when he auditioned off a painting to his relative. And Cranbourne comes in to announce that everything is ready and the viewing and the exhibition begins! And Lady Asquith decides to give Matron Bottomly her shawl. Matthias sneaks into Lady Asquith's carriage with help from Gideon, who distracts the driver. And when Matthias is in, he hides and is carted off. In the kitchen, Sheila and Elizabeth Boson pretend to be posh. But Sheila eventually realises that her jam tarts are still in the oven, but Blanche had already fetched them out of the oven because hers were in at the same time as well. Sheila then whispers to Elizabeth that they are going to be good friends. And at that moment, Ida comes in and the food is ready to be served. The art exhibition is opened by Colonel Brigwell. He thanks everybody, and Cranbourne especially, but Matron Bottomly then chips in, thanking the foundlings as well. I'm surprised that these two have repaired whatever bond they had after the last episode. So Ida rushes over to the tents to check on Hetty. Hetty is feeling depressed, and Ida has brought some food over to feed her. Ida says that Harriet was sent away and that she is a good maid, and that Hetty is a strong woman. She tells her to imagine that she is somewhere else, and she offers to help her imagine her happy place. Even Hetty at this moment, she can't imagine that she's somewhere else. Now, Lady Asquith's carriage arrives back at her house, and Matthias uses this moment to sneak into the house by the back door. Sheila and Blanche go around offering everybody food. They act all posh and polite, but then are spotted and taken away to do cloakroom duty as punishment. Blanche and Sheila decide to plot something. Ida asks Hetty to imagine where she's always wanted to go. Ida talks about a fishing village, boats, and a seaside town. They then talk a bit more about a beach at that moment. Sounds a bit more like the Iron Islands to me. And also, there's a big castle at the end of in that seaside town. But I'll tell you something, Hetty. You don't want to go in that castle, whatever you do. And it's got one of the best navies ever. In fact, you could say that some brave, stunning and brave woman is in charge of that navy. and then eventually gets taken over by another relative. Wouldn't it be nice if Hetty finds out she's from the Iron Islands? That would be the crossover of a century. Back to Lady Asquith's house, where Harriet is now a maid, and she decides to bring in some baked goods. Matthias then turns up, and they are both overjoyed to see each other. Ida and Hetty continue their beach scenario and then talk about fish. Elizabeth, Sheila and Blanche then admire the coats and play dress up. They imagine that they are all rich, and then Blanche hears something and goes to check out what's going on, while Sheila and Elizabeth carrying on, imagining that they are some Duke and Duchess of whatever. We want our privacy! So back to Harriet and Matthias. Matthias explains that it is his fault that Harriet is in this situation, but Harriet says that it was Blanche who betrayed them, and Hetty just got carried away with it. She says that she might have worn the feather if she'd have received it, and asks why he's there. Matthias asks her when he leaves the Foundling Hospital whether she'll be waiting for him. Harriet says that he'll know where to find her, and the carriage is about to depart. Matthias decides to leave, and Harriet gives him a pie for the journey home. Matthias then kisses her on the cheek, and he leaves. However, lurking in the background is the butler from the previous episode. So the carriage makes its return to the Foundling Hospital with Matthias in it, and he goes out as Gideon distracts the driver. Matthias goes to Ned and Walter, and they go back inside of the Foundling Hospital. Back to the tent. Now, Ida has to leave as time is running short, but Hetty doesn't want her to go, and Ida says that she'll tell her everything. She also says that Hetty's been a very own girl, and Hetty calls after her. Another painting has been sold, and Lady Asquith buys the most expensive painting of them all at £200. Then Blanche rushes in and accidentally knocks Brigwell's jam tart on into his shoe. Blanche says that there's a problem with one of the girls, and Matron goes out to see what the problem is. Brigwell says that he needs to talk to Cranbourne in private, and he takes him off with Lady Asquith as well. Sheila and Elizabeth are still playing dress up when Matron walks in with Blanche by her side. She tells them to put the coats back and that she will deal with them in the morning. When she leaves, Sheila and Elizabeth tell Blanche that she snitched on them, and Blanche says that she is nobody's friend. Matron returns to the art exhibition and says that they need to discuss how to spend their new money that they've gained. Brigwell says that they can spend it on boots, books and writing slates, and Lady Asquith points out that Cranbourne has a few good ideas, but Matron says that she needs to consider this. Brigwell reveals that Cranbourne has now been promoted to co-run the Foundling Hospital with Matron Bottomly. When the governors leave, Cranbourne says that she now has an equal and that one night of solitude is quite enough for one child, meaning he's talking about Hetty Feather. As requested by Cranbourne, Matron goes to free Hetty and she takes her back to the girls' dormitories. Sheila and everyone else looks at her she looks as though she's just come out of a fire, with her hair all messy. Matron goes back to her quarters to process what has just happened and claims that this is her hospital. We end the episode with Hetty laying down on her bed, now knowing that Ida Battersea is confirmed to be her mother. As she said, she's always been her girl, and she cries with tears of joy. So now we go on to episode 10, the season finale. Hetty is overjoyed to now know that Ida is her mother, and she goes off to confirm her suspicions. She goes into the kitchen, but before Ida can say anything, Sheila comes in and interrupts the conversation. Now to Matron, where she's rehearsing what to say to the governors now that the hospital is run by both her and Cranbourne. She slams her paper onto the table in frustration when Nurse Macclesfield comes in and says that there are visitors to see her. It is Lady Asquith with Harriet. After the title sequence, Hetty and Sheila have finished baking their bread. Hetty's looks severely undercooked with raw dough. Tell you what, they need someone like Paul Hollywood to judge. Can you imagine if Paul Hollywood made a guest appearance? Ida wants to make a plaited bloomer for Matron Bottomly's lunch, which the plaited bloomer is basically plaited bread. But just then, the old cook comes in, and Cook Jenkins almost sends Hetty and Sheila away. But Ida tells her that extra help is needed. Jenkins tells Hetty to go, and Sheila... Sorry, her name is Cook Jenkins. And if anyone remembers the meme Leroy Jenkins, can you imagine seeing she goes into Hetty? Cook Jenkins! As I was saying, Cook Jenkins almost sends Hetty and Sheila away, but Ida tells her that extra help is needed in the kitchen. Jenkins tells Hetty to go, and Sheila is staying to start making the plaited bloomer. Back to Matron's office, and Lady Asquith tells Matron that Collins reports that a foundling boy was spotted in the kitchen with Harriet. Matron says that no foundling boys have ever gone missing, and asks Harriet if this is true. Harriet says that it was just a street boy. Lady Asquith says that she failed to report this, and that another year in the foundling hospital is needed. Lady Asquith then sees herself out, and Harriet is ordered to get changed and go back to the foundling dormitories. Nurse Macclesfield, when she is gone, Nurse Macclesfield is not convinced by this and says that it was probably Matthias and that he wasn't in the art exhibition. Matron asks if Cranbourne was in charge of the boys yesterday, and Macclesfield confirms this with a yes. She also asks if she can send for Matthias, but Matron says that will not be necessary. Ida walks down the corridor and Hetty surprises her. She says that she needs to see her, but Ida says that she will be on the street if anybody finds out that Hetty is her daughter. Hetty says that they can meet in the tower after the next lesson. Cook Jenkins calls after Ida, and she goes off, promising to see her later. Hetty is excited and goes off back to the girls' dormitories, where she reunites with Harriet with a hug. Blanche goes into Matron Bottomly's office. Matron explains that a foundling boy escaped, and she is to gather information from Harriet. When she questions her orders, she is reminded that she told everybody that she was saved by Matron. Blanche retorts by saying that she could always tell the truth, but then she is threatened by Matron, telling her that she can be somewhere much worse. Matron also tells her that she is nothing and that she is all that Blanche has. Harriet and Hetty are cleaning the floors when Blanche comes up to them. Harriet immediately shuts her down before anything can happen. Blanche gets up to leave, but Hetty decides to automatically forgive her and tells everybody to forget about what happened, and that she will always get a gift from Matron Bottomly, and that eventually it will all stop. She also states that she's just a foundling like Hetty and everybody else, and Blanche says that Matron thinks that Matthias snuck out to see Harriet, and that she was told to get some in. Blanche dumps her toffee in the bucket and says that Matron can't win all the time. Okay, why in the hell did Hetty suddenly decide to forgive Blanche? Alright? I wouldn't if it was me. When the boys are marched down to lessons, Blanche calls Gideon over and she is hiding in the cupboard. She's looking for Matthias and says that Harriet is back. She also says that Matron knows that Matthias had escaped the other day, and Gideon goes with her while Ned and Walter go back to the class. When the girls go to their lessons, Sheila provokes Harriet by saying that she broke the china, and Elizabeth worsens it by saying that she mistook the salt for the sugar. Hetty confronts them but is stopped by Nurse Winterson. Hetty admits that it was both her and Harriet who started it, and they are told to clean out the storeroom. Elizabeth and Sheila suspect that they're going off to the tower. Harriet and Hetty are taken into the store cupboard, and Hetty tells Harriet that Ida is her mother. They both hug, and Hetty goes off to meet with her before leaving Harriet to sort out the storeroom. Poor Harriet, hasn't she had enough torture for the past few episodes? I mean, first of all, getting sent away, and now being left in the store cupboard alone to clean up. Gideon and Blanche go to tell Matthias about Harriet returning, and Blanche says that she can help out. Brigwell arrives to talk about Cranbourne's promotion, and Matron says that this would be beneficial only if Cranbourne lives up to the standards of a good leader. Hetty goes up to the tower, excited to speak to Ida. As it's break time, Elizabeth and Sheila go off to find Hetty. Blanche reports to Matron that it was Matthias who ran away, and that Harriet was telling Hetty about it during chores. She also points out that the Matthias dropped his cap in the scullery, and that it is now in the kitchen. And Matron tells Colonel Brigwell that there was an incident under Cranbourne's watch. Hetty climbs up to the tower to see Ida. When they are both up there, they hug and cry as they reunite. Sheila and Elizabeth are not far behind, and they also climb up the ladder. Ida recalls Hetty as a baby, and that she didn't want to let her go. Hetty suggests that they both leave the hospital, but Ida says that she can only leave when she's older, and that there could be consequences if they were to leave right now. Hetty says that she'll wait until then, and Ida compliments Hetty, saying that she gets her luck from her father. Hetty was originally called Sapphire, but now she's known as Hetty. Now, hence why they took that from the Sapphire Battersea book. Cranbourne and Matthias talk to Matron and Brigwell about what happened. Cranbourne says that Matthias was in the dormitories during the art fair, and when asked if he was accompanied, Cranbourne says that he gave him clear instructions. Matthias confirms this, but he says that he snuck out. Matthias confirms this, but he says that he snuck out to hide in the chapel to see the guests. He also recalls that Lady Asquith had brought a painting in, and that it was nice of Brigwell to hand Blanche a handkerchief when the food fell on his shoe. Matron says that Matthias is lying, and she proves her point by saying that a cap was left at Lady Asquith's house, and blames Cranbourne for what happened. Matthias then hands out his cap, and Cranbourne confirms this by saying that each one is labelled with the foundling's classification number. Brigwell apologises to Cranbourne for wasting his time, and looks at Matron Bottomly after he said that. Sheila and Elizabeth manage to sneak into the tower, and they hear a voice that isn't Harriet. Hetty then fetches her journal and shows it to Ida. Elizabeth then prompts Sheila to go, and then they decide to leave. Hetty shows Ida her coin token, and Ida reveals that she has a coin token similar to Hetty's as well. Before they go, Ida says that they have to keep this a secret. Matthias goes to see Harriet again, and they hug. He says that he will see her again sometime, and that he goes off leaving Harriet all happy. Hetty and Ida part ways, but Sheila is spying on them. She goes off to follow them, while Elizabeth decides to stop out of all this and goes back to classes. So now we go to Matron Bottomly's office, where she looks all depressed, and she's even face palming. Like, you know that Star Trek meme with the Jean-Luc Picard face palming? There's been more variations of that as well. But when Matron Bottomly's face palming, you know you've messed up. Where all of a sudden... So Sheila then bursts in, proclaiming that Ida is Hetty Feather's mother. Hetty returns to Harriet now that she's seen Ida. Nurse Macclesfield comes in and inspects the storeroom, and she sends them both back to the dormitories. While eating dinner, the boys are all talking, and Nurse Macclesfield stares at Matthias. Matron Bottomly comes in looking for Ida, and she knows about her being Hetty's mother, which she announces in front of everybody, including Ida. Ida is then dismissed. As this is joint control, Matron Bottomly makes Cranbourne have to choose. With regret, Cranbourne chooses to escort Ida off of the premises. Gideon rushes off to tell Hetty, and half of the foundlings go off to see her and try to stop Matron from kicking her out. Ida and Hetty both cry as they are separated, and the foundlings stand with one another in solidarity. Afterwards, everybody goes inside, and Hetty vows to find her mother and says it to Matron's face. And we end the series with Hetty vowing to find her mother, no matter the cost. So, for the 9th episode, I like how when Hetty is in the tent, as it goes between the art exhibition and Hetty, she slowly loses her sanity and hope. And I think that this episode sees a different side to Blanche. She's evolving, I think. Her character has had some more development where she's on nobody's side, but she is still threatened by Matron in the next episode. And then with Harriet getting sent away at the beginning and Matthias rushing off in order to find her again, I think that's sort of facing his fear because in season 1, of course, he ran off, and now he runs away in order to ask Harriet if she will travel the world with him. Now, with the plot twist of Matron and Cranbourne getting a joint running, I think Colonel Brigwell, after the last episode, sees that Matron is losing it a bit, and she needs somebody to help keep things under control. And Cranbourne, in his vision, is the best person to do that. I think towards the end of the episode, they kind of rushed Ida a bit because while Hetty was suffering in the Tench, she said, "Oh, by the way, we find out that Ida is her mother." I think that's a little bit rushed. I love how she describes a place similar to the Iron Islands from Game of Thrones as well. How many Game of Thrones fans watching, or, oh yeah, Game of Thrones isn't for kids, or about how many people watching it with the kids will be thinking, that sounds kind of like the Iron Islands from Game of Thrones. Yeah. One thing you'll notice as I review this series, that I always compare Ida Battersea to Yara Greyjoy because they're both played by the same actor. But I always have to plonk in a little Game of Thrones reference here and there. And then the bit where I think Sheila and Elizabeth are both a bit cheeky in this episode. I think it shows off a comedic side to both of the actors. And then towards the end of the episode, and the end of the episode is obviously Hetty finding out that Ida is her mother. As we go into the next episode, I think, and I've said this already, but they rushed Ida a bit because personally I think that Ida should have stood up to Matron at some point. Lady Asquith firing Harriet. Of course, Harriet only lasted about, not long in her new position as Lady Asquith's kitchen maid. And having to lie in order to cover up Matthias being there. And Matthias also playing along as well. Then there's the reunion between Hetty and Harriet, which was pretty nice. And then Harriet suffers quite a lot over these 2 episodes because she's then sent away by surprise, and then she joins Lady Asquith, and immediately she's fired, and she comes back to the Foundling Hospital, and then she's left to clean the storeroom all by herself while Hetty gallivants off to see her mother. I think as for this episode of Blanche, there's a moment where her and Matron both threaten one another. And Blanche still has that information that she can expose Matron Bottomly with. But Matron also undermines her by saying that she says that Matron saved her and she can send her to a much worse place than this, which was originally the asylum which she was on about when she debuted. Again, Sheila and Elizabeth both are a bit cheeky towards Harriet. And then And then at the end, when they kick out Ida and Cranbourne has to choose, I think a part of him didn't want to do it and he wanted to stand up to Matron because Ida is Hetty's mother and all he wants is for the foundlings to be happy and have a good life. And eventually, and he also says this in the previous episode as well, he stands up to Matron. I think he finally realises that Matron is cruel. I think he knows what she's all about, and I think he's trying to tip the balance of the power, or at least try and soften her up a bit. And he also apologises when he goes out. And the ending scene when the foundlings all stand in solidarity. And then and of course at the end we get an emotional Hetty. As a whole, Series 2 has to be my favourite in the entire show. Not just because they build on existing characters, but they introduce some new characters as well. They also decide to get rid of Polly and replace her with Blanche mid-season, and it has my favourite story arc of all time, which is Monica's death. Now, this isn't just because of story writing wise, as it sets up a change in some of the characters' mindsets, but also the actors give it their hearts for this entire story arc. Not just Monica's actor, but the other actors as well. They do an amazing job of portraying the aftermath of a death. They made what seemed like a side character in the first season more relevant in the second. They also build upon Elizabeth's character a little bit more. And I think this sees a change in Elizabeth most of all as well. I think Monica's death affects Elizabeth a lot more than it has Sheila. Now, with the character of Ida Battersea, first of all, as a Game of Thrones fan, I cannot unsee Game of Thrones. And I always think of Yara Greyjoy whenever she comes on screen. But I think she was a kind-hearted woman and she was a good temporary replacement for Cook Jenkins. At the end of the season, I think that they kind of jumped the gun a bit on making Ida Hetty's mother. They could have done that a bit later. And then they could have done something else. But you could see that, and also they develop on Cranbourne's character as well, that we learn a bit more about Cranbourne's life and his family, that he is descended from an earl. And one of the whole plots of this series is where Matron Bottomly tries to manipulate Cranbourne into giving her some money. But eventually that all fails and she is outraged by this and she gives him the cold shoulder as the series hastens. It means that Matron is more controlled this time and that she's not as free as to do what she wants to do. And even at the end, she still has that power over Cranbourne, where she makes him choose whether to keep Ida or kick her out, and he does so with regret. The character of Blanche, I think that she was clever at first. I liked her. I saw her as an equal to Matron, like someone that could, an anomaly of sorts that could take down Matron and Hetty at the same time. Like she could be on her own side. But I think that they made her kind of jumping on both sides here. But instead she's playing for her own side. Now for Polly. I'm kind of sad that she left early in the series because she was one of my favourite characters in the show. Because she was the cautious one. Yeah, it's a shame that we never got to see Polly again. I liked her character. Like I say, I think that Matthias and Harriet's relationship as well is good because We get to see a relationship between two of the foundlings, and even Nurse Macclesfield starts to notice this at the very end of the series. And you can see that through their communication and body language that they like each other. Of course, sometimes they have a guest star. I liked Dr. Whammon's animal exhibition. And also the story arc of Vince and Judd trying to get a football off of Stanley. Now we get on to Stanley. I love Stanley's character. I think he's a bit underrated, personally. We should have seen more of him in the next series, or as the series went on. Also, Ned's character develops a bit more here. He has this passion for sleuthing and being a detective. I think the idea of Harriet then getting sent away, then getting put as a maid for Lady Asquith, and then going back to the Foundling Hospital immediately was a bit rushed. And at the end, I think she's starting to change a bit. Her character's starting to change a bit more and act more like a grown-up and not playing along with what Hetty wants to do. Speaking of Hetty, she also gets a bit more cheeky in this series, where she thinks she can manipulate Matron to do what she wants, but then, oh no, I've done something terrible. Now I'm going to be in the tench. And indeed, this gives her the plot twist where Ida is revealed to be her mother. Thank you very much for watching this episode. I'd like to thank you all. So yeah, thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. So goodbye, good night, and follow the buzzards.